Good evening. Welcome to another Hot Topic where we discuss the issues of the day in East Yorkshire and Northern Lincolnshire. Last week, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, delivered his autumn statement and spending review. There are to be no further cuts in police budgets. The tax credits are to be left alone. Hull will receive a government grant for being the City of Culture in 2017. But how are all these changes going to affect those in our region? Joining me in the studio to discuss the spending review in more detail are my guests tonight. Dr. Ian Kelly, Chief Executive of Hull and Humber Chamber of Commerce. He's worked there since 1995 and he holds that PhD in relations between government and local industry. And I'm also joined by Melanie On, an old friend now of Estuary TV, Labour MP for Great Grimsby. Welcome to Hot Topic. I'm Hugh Richards. Before we start, let's see how the people of Grimsby reacted to the spending plans.
So I think, he ought to have said initially, when he first said what he was going to do.
Yeah.
What do you think about things like increased police spending and cuts and a reverse on the tax credits decision?
I think that's a good thing, the increase in police spending, because in Grimsby, we've had quite a lot of, incidents where we should have had police and they just haven't been able to get there because they've been elsewhere.
It's nothing's really made us any poorer. So.
What do you think about things like increases in police spending and increases in the state pension?
That's good.
They should have increased the expenditure for the police because you need them.
Yeah.
We live in just outside on the border of Grimsby, and police we never see one. And we have trouble, and so you need more police on the beat.
I thought it was pretty good because he spent a lot more on defence and things like that, which is quite important given the current climate. And I think he decided to cut to stop the imposed tax on families, didn't he? So I thought that was pretty good, to be honest. There's still a lot of things that I don't think are good, but overall it was a lot better than last time.
What sort of things do you think are very good?
The defence spending, extra spending for the NHS. I think there should be more spending on the NHS. I think that education is probably something that could be cut. I don't think there needs to be a massive budget for it, but yeah.
We've got to spend a certain amount on the NHS, a certain amount on the police, but it's all got to come from somewhere or from the one pot, and it's the way he divides it. And I think we have to wait and see. Because I say tax credits and things like that, they don't affect us, do they?
No.
But I don't think that they should take it off the poor all the time.
I think what they've done with this spending thing, they've given it to the wrong people. I mean, I know people allowed to work and places like that, and I know they can't get jobs. But then there's other people that just don't want work. So, what do you say? I mean, I suppose we're lucky because we was born in the right period. I mean, like these people that's going for handouts with food parcels. I mean, we went through that, and we had to. We managed. We just cooked stuff and made the best you could.
What do you think of the decision to reverse tax credit cuts then? Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, this tax credit, again, it's for the people with money. It's not for such as us. And when he puts next year he's going to put money on petrol, he's going to hit the working man again, and it's all wrong.
As ever, mixed views from the streets of Grimsby there, and gratefully received opinions. Melanie, can I start with you? Just get this out of the way, this brute politics. John McDonnell and his Chairman Mao's Little Red Book. Did he just leave the office that morning without thinking, I'll just run this past somebody else and see if it's a good idea?
I've got absolutely no idea where he got the idea from, but that's very John, he says we need to have some more flamboyance in politics. Well, he certainly pulled it out of his pocket with a flourish and then threw it across the dispatch box table to George Osborne.
He threw it in quite a cross way as well, didn't
he? He certainly did, yes. I think, perhaps a stunt not to be repeated is the lesson from that.
I think that's the consensus. It's tough, though, I would imagine. Ian, you and I have never sat in Parliament, as Melanie has, but it's tough to be facing, responding to a speech, a long, hour-long speech that you've had no sight of beforehand, and you have no idea what's going in it. How does a leader of the opposition on Budget Day or the Shadow Chancellor on Spending Review Day, how on earth does a man react to that?
I think it is very difficult, and you see that, and you read in the memoirs of politicians how difficult that is, doing that specific job. But I suppose it could have been worse. He could have done what Michael Heseltine did, which was wield the mace, and that is flamboyant.
You're going back quite a while there, actually, back to the 1970s. But I suppose that's the trivial politics of it. And to his credit, he was trying to mock Osborne sucking up to the Chinese.
Absolutely, and I think that there was a serious point that he was trying to make around that. You know, we're having some of our kind of key elements of industry being built, like nuclear power station, being built by the Chinese. So what are we going to own, and what are the Chinese going to own? And he's been over to China, I suspect, quite a lot more than he's been in his own constituency, trying to build those business links that will hopefully improve the economy. I
think all parties would hope that Chinese links will improve the economy. Just one more on the John McDonnell thing, just because it's insightful about the nature of the workings inside Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. There was a story in The Guardian that suggested that he had actually discussed this idea with his staff or other staff, really? And that there'd been a committee, as it were, deciding whether or not to do the little red. But is that how it works in the Labour Party? You have a committee to decide on the jokes?
Well, now I'm on the front bench. One of my key roles is to try and be funny, ready for the Thursday morning business questions. But as to how it works in John McDonnell's office, as to how it works in Jeremy's office, I really can't offer any insight, I'm afraid. I mean, they have their teams, just like everybody has their teams. You know, George Osborne had 10 special advisors helping him pull together his spending review. Now, I don't think that John...
Treasury, really,
and I don't think that John McDonnell has that kind of resource available to him. But I think I did see Newsnight, and Seema Malhotra said it was definitely John's decision to do it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's leave that there and talk about the other...
Whatever would the High Steward of Hull, Peter Mandelson, think?
Could the High Steward of Hull, Peter Mandelson, well, he would be pulling the strings behind the scenes somewhere. The tax credit U-turn that George Osborne achieved he was rescued by the sort of a bit of lucky accounting in the 27 billion that he found at the back of the sofa. We'll talk about that in a minute. But does that in effect, it means that the state is staying large, doesn't it? Is it that the state is continuing to be about 40% of the economy? Is that a good thing?
Well, I think it is for now. I think the plans are that it will come down, and with the universal credit proposals that Ian Duncan-Smith are bringing in, it'll change at that point. But for now, I think he's taken the pain out of the immediate crisis he had over that issue by the benefits of the Office of Budget Responsibility.
Well, indeed.
I mean, I don't think that you ever forget that George Osborne is carving a path to be the next leader of the Conservative Party, and to do that he needs support from all corners of his party, and there were some of his backbenchers who were heavily opposed to the changes to tax credits because it would impact on the poorest families so substantially. It was going to make the average family around £1,600 a year worse off, and so really he was playing that long game and sticking very firmly to the centre ground. So this spending review, I think, salvaged what could have been a leadership campaign ending moment.
Well, that's the position he's in, because with the majority government, with only a very small majority of 12 in the House of Commons, of course, the front bench, the government front bench, is more vulnerable really to its own backbench revolutionaries than it is to the opposition. I'm afraid I say that with the greatest respect, Melanie.
No, absolutely. I mean, that is really where you think the Labour Party needs to be very strategic in the decisions that it's making. It can't be about opposing for opposing's sake. It needs to be a much more targeted offence. So when it comes to Tory proposals, picking and choosing very carefully the things that are opposed, and then trying to work with the government to either amend those, so we take the pain out of some of the worst hits of the Tory proposals that they're implementing, all their manifesto proposals, but also working with some of the backbenchers to say, look, we're not unreasonable, but we want you to work with us on this. So hopefully that will that will bring some more Conservatives over to us on some of those big issues where we need that support.
Can you just mention some of the Tory potential rebels on the back there? Some of our own local Conservative MPs were there. They should probably get the credit or the blame, depending on what. Andrew Percy, Briggan Gall was certainly a threat to the front bench there. I think Martin Vickers of Cleethorpes, I'm right in saying.
He didn't vote against. He has spoken out against them, but he hasn't voted against.
I want to come back a little bit more to the politics of the spending review in a moment, but we'll have to stop there for a quick break. Join us in a minute. Welcome back. Still with me in the studio are my guests, Melanie On MP for Great Grimsby in the Labour interest and Dr Ian Kelly of the Hull and Humber Chamber of Commerce. And we're talking about the Chancellor of the Exchequer's autumn spending review. We were just talking about how you oppose this as the largest opposition party, and the idea, Melanie, that you could strategically and tactically unite with the possibility of government rebellions on their own backbenches and things. On this issue of the tax credits, then it was a very centrist rebellion. People like Andrew Percy and Martin Vickers, our local MPs, were involved, as we've just said. But some of those issues, the rebels, the likely rebels in the Tory party, are what John Major called the swivel-eyed loons, the sort of right-wing, anti-European, xenophobic part of the Conservative Party, which I say completely objectively and impartially. But how comfortable are you going to be associating yourselves with those possibilities of revolution?
Well, I think it depends on the policy, to be perfectly honest, and it depends on what's being brought forward and the purpose behind trying to oppose it. But my point is that you don't oppose for the sake of opposing, and using that small majority to our benefit as an opposition and being an effective opposition and challenging the government.
You succeeded not in the democratically elected House of Commons on these tax credits, but in the feudal sons of the followers of Norman the Conqueror in the House of Lords. How comfortable are you using the, if not a feudal oligarchy, but as the appointed house?
They certainly come in handy sometimes, don't they? On this occasion, it worked in our favour. I think that the facility that the Lords have to be able to hold the government, if the government is intent on pushing matters through without proper scrutiny, to send it back and say, have another look, is absolutely right. And there's an element here of saying, well, George Osborne, what he should have done is put it through in a bill so it could have had proper government and parliamentary scrutiny, but he didn't. He put it through in a statutory instrument, which is why it allowed the Lords to bounce it back.
But if he put it through in a bill, then the Lords couldn't have turned it down because of the, what is it called, the Shaftesbury Convention.
Absolutely. But then there would have been sufficient parliamentary scrutiny of it in the first place, which as a statutory instrument we weren't able to do. You're not able to take it through a bill committee and review it line by line and try to achieve any changes that you might on a party political point.
That's the point, is the tax credits remain, which looks like an act of generosity, but there's an element of legerdemain there, isn't there? I think the Institute for Fiscal Studies say that nevertheless, by the time the universal credit comes in, which is a new way of paying benefits, about 2.6 million people, the Institute of Fiscal Studies thinks, will be about £1,600 worse off a year. Is this a bit giving with one hand and taking away with the other?
Well, that's what politicians do, isn't it? You've got to massage your way through difficult situations, and the funding position that we're in is difficult. And the one thing I think you can say on behalf of the business community, we do understand the importance of getting the deficit down and living within your means. And it's not a happy process, but it's something that does need to be done. Timing of it is a little more gentle now than it was originally, and this 27 billion down the back of the sofa has come in very handy as well.
I just think it's really interesting that what George Osborne has done in terms of his spending review, remember, said that by now deficit would be gone. Well, that hasn't happened, and what he's done is revert to Alistair Darling's spending plan before the 2010 election, and you just think it's amazing.
Alistair Darling, as a moderate, sort of Blairite, as it were, Labour Chancellor, if Osborne's following his plans, presumably Osborne will have your full 100% support.
Well, the thing is that we have always said that what we want to do is to try and get the books back into a healthy state, but it's about how we go about it. And so we haven't agreed with some things because we always said when the Chancellor was elected in 2010 that what he was planning was going to be cutting too hard, too fast and hitting the wrong people. And with the tax credits, that has absolutely borne fruit.
I just want to use Ian as an expert witness here with your business head on. We're paying, on the interest on the government debt, we're paying about the same as we're paying for defence. And frigates are quite pricey. So what will it mean to me, to my pocket, in 5 years' time if the Chancellor is right and the debt is gone?
Well, I think the danger is the accumulated national debt, which is now, I think, 1.4 trillion. Now, at the moment, with very low interest rates, once those interest rates start to rise again, which they will, there'll be a lot of pressure in the system. There's still a very big debt overhang, whether it's for the government itself or in the community at large in people's pockets. And so once interest rates do start to go up, you will have pressure coming back into the system again. And so 10 billion by the end of this Parliament as a surplus is all very well and good. But when you've got a 1.4 trillion national debt to service and the interest rates are going up, that's a problem still.
So the difference is just the difference between the deficit and the debt there. The 10 billion that the Chancellor wants us to be in credit by is in the difference between revenues and expenditure that year, but that doesn't, it's not paying off
the national debt,
as it were.
That's right, you know, and in that sense it does highlight the scale of the problems that we've suffered since the crash, if you like, post Lehman Brothers, and the scale of the problems with debt that we're going to have for generations, actually, not just a few years.
It hurts, though, doesn't it, stopping spending this? There are about 37% of government departments are going to have 37% cuts over the next 5 years of about £18 billion. In fact, taxes are going to be increased by about 28.5 billion over the next 5 years. And as Ronald Reagan said, a billion here, a billion there, it soon adds up. It's painful.
I find that.
How would the Labour Party be doing it differently? Would it be just cutting the deficit much more slowly? Would it be still supplying these departments with much more money?
Well, I mean, there was always a very sensible, credible plan before 2010, and we continued with that ahead of the 2015 general election, which was about getting spending under control, being responsible as a government needs to be in all areas of it, but trying to invest, trying to stimulate the economy, trying to get people back to work so your tax revenues do go up.
You still have to spend less, though, one way or another.
Yes, and there was a programme for that. I mean, as to where we are now, we've obviously just had a rapid change in terms of our leadership team, and so in terms of the strategy, I think it's going to be slightly different, shall we say, going forward.
A great leap forwards,
perhaps. Quite possibly.
Let's talk about some of the specifics again, how it's going to affect this region and the business community. One of the things that he's taking away is he's going to raise £3 billion on an apprentice levy. Companies, he says, should be training their own people.
I heard that there used to be an industrial training levy that existed, but under Margaret Thatcher they scrapped that. So is it just a reintroduction of that old process that seemingly at one stage the Tories didn't like, but now they do?
We're both looking at you, Ian.
Well, they've come and gone, statutory processes for training and all the rest of it. I suspect, the big companies aren't awfully keen on this, but many of them do have their own in-training facilities and capabilities. So we'll have to see how that washes out. I think the most important thing is that apprenticeships still continue to grow. They are doing well. It is a positive process that's going on apprenticeships, but it's important that small businesses are able to take on apprentices as well. And so the changing systems, how, for example, the Skills Funding Agency will be affected by the cuts, I think is interesting, and that sort of detail hasn't come out yet from the budget as to how the mechanics of government will work with the cuts that are coming in and the new processes that the Chancellor wants to bring in.
It should be said that about 98% of businesses won't be paying this apprenticeship levy because you're only paying if your annual pay bill is, what, about, is £1 million?
3 million, I think it was.
What about just the change to the capital gains tax? It's not that the capital gains tax is going up, but you have to pay it in a shorter window, which means, of course, that you don't hold on to that money for as long, which is a cash flow issue. He's going to raise about £230 million by that. That's not very helpful.
Well, sort of, from that point of view, it's relatively small fry in the bigger picture of what's happening in the changes. So, we'll live with that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting you talk about cash flow because I heard an example the other day about, companies really struggling with cash flow. Actually, I think they've got a government contract, they don't get paid. They get paid something like every 60 days or something like that, but of course they've got monthly wage bills to pay in the meantime. Any delays on that or advance squeezes on their immediate need to pay more in advance of their bills coming in makes it very, very difficult for them to operate.
Well, it's always difficult and hard to pay a tax bill, isn't it? Apart from anything else, we've seen this in Tata Steel, one form of taxation or another. That's going to endanger businesses to some extent. And sorry, I don't want to get too detailed down here, but there's one other bit of nitty-gritty here. The small business rate relief scheme has been extended. Were you expecting this?
Well, I think that's good. You do have a big issue that's looming in terms of, rates and how that's going to go forward. For example, in the retail sector in particular, you can see that problem as more people move to the internet and the cost of premises in the high streets. There's a lot of shops closing down, and that whole area is being reviewed still. And I think it's hopefully will end up with a better business tax on premises.
We'll come back and discuss some more of these details in a moment, but for the moment we've got to stop. Come back in a minute. Welcome back. I'm still with Dr. Ian Kelly of the Hull and Humber Chamber of Commerce and with Melanie Onn, MP for Great Grimsby in the Labour interest. We were just talking about taxation and maybe changes to taxation. In some ways, he's been generous, the Lord Chancellor of the Exchequer, with the small business rate relief scheme. In other ways, which we'll talk about later, he's taking a lot back. But let's just talk about this idea of the state as opposed to private businesses, private individuals, private enterprises. How big as a part of the economy is the state and how big should it be? At the end of the last Labour government, about 43% of GDP was going through the state. About the same as at the end of the last Thatcher government, last Conservative government before 2010. Before John Major, the end of the 1980s. And she was regarded as being a very small state, libertarian, powerful individual, small government, Melanie. And she wasn't cutting as hard as the Labour Party was. And how big is it now?
Well, you'll have to give me those figures, Hugh. Okay. Because the point is, that I think that people who are traditional Conservative voters consider the Conservatives to be able to deliver a smaller state, a much smaller state, so that people are less dependent. This idea
and
that
paying less tax.
And exactly, yeah. So there are lower tax revenues as a result. So. Is that happening? I mean, we're not seeing individual tax coming down. We're not seeing VAT coming down. We're not seeing stamp duty on houses coming down. Particularly not second property owners now. That'll be going. That will be going up. So it's interesting. I think that there are a lot of kind of quite centrist Tory voters that will be looking at that and thinking George Osborne actually with this tax credits U-turn is not doing what I think the Tory government should be doing.
You in putting yourself in the persona of a right-wing Tory voter.
Absolutely. Yeah. As I clearly am.
Well, I don't think it comes now. Ian, the state is, I think it is shrinking because certainly this autumn statement does bring down the size of the amount of money or the proportion of money that's going through the Treasury. Is that healthy for business?
Well, I think sort of it has been too high in terms of the position we were at and the impact it was having on the economy. I think whether we get down to the sort of mid to late 30% will be interesting because these cuts haven't all gone through yet.
I don't think it's been down that low since probably since the Second World War.
But the important thing is that your state is as large as the state requires. So, for example, where the Treasury is cutting, for example, in areas like adult social care or mental health services, all of those things are things that actually end up adding to the social budget later on, because the problems that it causes means that there is a greater cost later on. So it's a false economy in some ways. He might be, trying to knock a couple of percentage points off on the GDP front, but what the communities need isn't what they're getting at the moment.
Well, there are certain push and pull factors in there. One is that, as you say, there's an ageing population, and if the state is to support people in their care as they get older, plus the fact that there's more people with retirement pay and not generating income at work, those are factors that shape some of those decisions, as are the fact that, as we've discussed, the national debt is now so large, it's taking, I think, over £40 billion worth of interest payments as we stand out of the books each year, and so that's got to be found in other places, or these cuts have got to be made to compensate.
Maybe it's not, as you say, Melanie, that the state will be as big as the state wants to be, which is a Orwellian, terrifying phrase. Maybe
needs to be. I think I said needs to be in terms of what individual citizens need to have a safe and healthy life.
It's just that those who, and I'll put my devil's advocate hat on here and take my brief from my client, but there are those in certainly behind George Osborne who would say that a redistributed taxation system, progressive taxation system, takes money away from people who've earned it and can create value, and gives it to people who haven't created any value, and that you are fined for succeeding and rewarded for failing, and that they would wish to rebalance that function of the state within society.
Well, at the same time, if you leave people who are struggling at the bottom just to get on by their own merits, a lot of people will not be able to do that, and so it's a greater drain on society. So that is one of the fundamental problems with conservative thought, that it just leaves those people at the bottom and never assists them, never gives them the supposed helping hand up that is supposed to exist in a society where people work for a common good.
A social contract question here, very Lockean. Why is it that the people who do succeed on their merit, how do they owe a debt to those who don't succeed on merit?
Is it always on merit? I think that's the question, because I think a lot of the time you'll find
to be the Duke of Grimsby.
But a lot of the time it's not just about merit, is it? Because if you come from a fairly middle class background, and this is not to be disparaging at all, but if you come from a stable background, if you come from a family where there is work, if you go to a good school, all of those things work in your favour, and so it gives you a different start in life from other people who do not have those opportunities. And I think it's always worth remembering, if you've never been in that situation, you'll never understand. But when you do not have any money, when you are reliant on the state, if you don't go to a great school because the funding isn't there, then you do need a little bit of extra help.
I want to just, that leads us quite nicely onto a couple of the Chancellor's other measures about second homes and the buy-to-let market. I'd say it leads it on because that's a sort of way of storing wealth, as it were, and that's especially the buy-to-let. So a 3% rise in stamp duty for buy-to-lets and second homes. What influence is that going to have on the housing market around the Humber?
Well, I rather preferred our discussion on Rousseau's social contract to Harold Wilson and Tony Crossland's social contract. But when it comes to second homes, I actually don't think this area is as bad as many places. There has been some, I think, purchase of properties by people out from London in this part of the world, maybe in student land, but I don't think we're as heavily impacted by second homes here, so it won't be as big an issue.
But the buy-to-let issue, there is a big buy-to-let market around here, and that does it blocks up the housing market, as it were. It keeps the house prices high. It's so difficult for young people to get onto the housing ladder and buy for the first time, and the house prices are at quite an inflated rate, even in parts of Grimsby and parts of Hull, parts of Scunthorpe, that it's difficult to get one.
Well, I think this is one of the interesting things in this statement, insofar as that there will be many natural Tory supporters who will be involved in these buy-to-let type arrangements, who the Chancellor's put to one side anyway to take this action because of the problems in the housing market. And as you say, there is a supply and demand problem. There are more people who want houses than there are available. He's doing something things which are good to help on the supply side, but the scale of the problem is so big that there's a lot to do.
One of the things he's doing to try to add some supply to satisfy that demand is investing £2 billion for the building of 400,000 new affordable homes.
I know. Well, it's very attractive. It's not. I'd say that it's not a new pledge, to bring forward house building. And if we look at the Tories' programme over the last 5 years, it's been woeful in terms of the numbers that it's actually managed to build. And I was looking at some of the figures around how much it would cost to buy one of the new affordable homes, and you have to have an income of around £56,000 a year. Well, if I look around Grimsby, there won't be too many people on £56,000 a year. In London, there will not be a lot of people on £56,000 a year. So enabling those people where there is a critical shortage of housing is going to be incredibly difficult.
Well, the national average income is around £24,000.
I know.
It's probably a bit lower than that round in this part of the world because it's so inflated by London. So that's not really any affordable housing. If you have to spend, if you can only afford to buy an affordable house if you have twice as much money as you have, that's nonsense, isn't it?
And I think there are other better schemes out there. I think that some of the help around achieving mortgages has been much more successful. I think that needs to be opened up and rolled out much more, because I think that's been more successful in getting people on the property ladder. Sorry, I interrupted you, Ian. Go on.
I wasn't going to say anything, actually.
Well, I was going to just, it might, from a Chamber of Commerce point of view, in terms of that building programme, that's going to be useful to a lot of your members, a lot of your companies, because that's a generation of an economy.
Well, interestingly, the construction industry has faltered a bit this year, and manufacturing struggling a little bit. The service sector's building up again quite nicely. So you're quite right in terms of house builders and the construction industry. They'll be quite pleased at measures that will boost housing. Let's just see if we can get through the planning process.
Well, that's another matter. But we were talking about this in Hot Topic last week, housing and homelessness. And every time you build a house, you're employing an enormous number of people. I mean, just building a group of houses creates a massive boost to the local economy.
I'm surprised more isn't being done through the likes of Shoreline here in Grimsby and the housing associations.
Not for lack of trying, I'm sure.
I think they would feel that they could contribute more to the process, and it'll be interesting to see, as I say, how the mix of the private sector, respond and how quickly they can respond to this.
I mean, the ideal would also be if the government were to properly fund the housing associations or councils so that they could build a significant number of council houses, because the amount that's been allocated for council house building is not sufficient.
Excellent. Well, we'll come back to that issue a lot, I suspect, housing, but we'll come back to other issues from the autumn statement after this break. Welcome back to Hot Topic. We're talking about the Chancellor of the Exchequer's autumn statement, and I'm still with Dr. Ian Kelly of the Hull and Humber Chamber of Commerce and Melanie On, Labour MP for Grimsby. I take it that one of the least controversial and most welcome things George Osborne did last week, was £2 billion to be invested in flood protection, 335 million of it here on the Humber. Necessary?
Absolutely. You saw the tidal surge. You saw how bad it. Well, we could see how it could have gone had it been, the lock gates not held in Grimsby Docks. And so, from that point of view, it is badly needed here. And I'm pleased to see they're spending some serious money. They could do with spending even more serious money with the scale of the issues. I think it's about 800 million that's required. They'd soon spend that in London. So it's nice to see them spending at least some of it here now.
Tides occur at regular and easily predictable intervals. Why have we not had this investment before?
I think it's difficult to say. I mean, we've got we've got a situation now where the country is suffering all over the place. I think that the tidal defences in this area were at a point where they could not survive, and so it was absolutely necessary. And it wasn't that long ago we did a debate in the House of Commons specifically on coastal flooding. And the issue there was very clear. It's not just about the coastal flooding, that there are lots of other environmental factors, and all of them seem to be congregating around our area. So it really was a matter of necessity. And my argument at the time was, you need to put money in up front to prevent these problems happening. And I think that is, that has been heard, which is very welcome.
Well, there is a connection here, isn't there, between the tidal defences and climate change. One of the reasons maybe the tides are getting higher and more damaging is because of the pollution in the atmosphere, which comes to the very welcome investments in renewable energy around the...
Absolutely. I thought
we were talking about last time.
We were talking about that last time, yes. I mean, you could dispute perhaps the government's commitment on renewable energy. I think that there has been some rowing back. There have been issues around solar, but we won't rehearse all of those, I'm sure. I'll get you out of that one.
One other very local thing specifically for us is, and I turned to Ian because you're based in Hull, the money that Hull is going to get by dint of its being City of Culture.
We have an office here in Grimsby as well, but I take your point. I think sort of $1 million actually for a City of Culture for a year possibly isn't as much as it sounds, especially being as we have some nice people down from London to help us spend it, and opening the Olympics as they're used to doing in Martin Green's case was probably a fairly expensive exercise, but anything's better than nothing in these times of austerity, so we'll make it go as far as we can, and we'll add to that locally with what we do.
Is that the case then? Really the money is being spent on people who've been allocated to Hull to deliver Hull's City of Culture?
No, all I'm saying is obviously the City of Culture exercise is being led by a couple of very talented people in Rosie Millard and Martin Green, but their essential skill set comes from London. Martin's case, he helped open the Olympics, which was fantastic, but from that point of view, some of the sorts of things that they will be doing and the scale of what they're used to doing are probably fairly expensive. And all I'm saying is £1 million might not seem as much to them in their London prices as it does to us locally.
Is it like the price of a pint? Is very different.
The price of a couple of pints in London, £1 million. But what's the politics of that then, Melanie? Why did Osborne make that fuss? Why did he make this really rather insignificant payment to Hull?
I've got absolutely no idea, really. I mean, I think that the Labour backbenchers for Hull have done a very good job about speaking up for Hull, and they've been quite keen to promote the City of Culture. Why he's decided to sort of throw some of his small change that way, I don't know.
Alan's a good lobbyist. I lobbied with him when we got Hull Trains, Hull City, the Chamber, and Alan Johnson. We got the Hull Train service, and he's a good lobbyist. He knows how to work the system. And as he said, when I was I remember him saying to me a while back, when I was a cabinet minister, I'd always invite the opposition in and listen to them carefully, and they're doing that to me now. I'm in opposition, he says. Maybe it's his soft London Cockney skills.
Can lobby for a bit more then.
That's enough time talking about a mere £1 million. We spent all this programme talking in billions, and the final thing I just want to talk about is local councils, local government funding, where the Chancellor has been really quite rough. 56% cut to local government funding overall. North East Lincolnshire, I'm sorry I can't talk about Hull or East Yorkshire as much, but North East Lincolnshire has lost 40% of its budget anyway in the last 7 years, and 8 million of it just in the last year. Now, how necessary, again with your business hat on here, how necessary is it to have that local government infrastructure in order to thrive?
Well, I think two things to say. First of all, the reality is local government did grow very significantly under the Labour years. It grew about 30%. So the chopping back now is very substantial, but the Conservatives believe not in delivery so much, but in an enabling role for local authorities. Now, I'm not saying I agree or disagree with that, but that's the context of which some of those changes are being made. And it is tough for them, but clearly they're going to have to do less better under the new arrangements.
Council tax is going to go up. Probably, well, the Chancellor has said council tax can go up by 2%. Nobody's going to let it go up by less than that.
Well, there's a couple of things, aren't there? I mean, this idea that councils are become enabling facilities, I mean, what that means essentially is that they contract everything out to private companies or third sector organisations. So central government money effectively goes to private companies, I don't know, like Serco, like Atos, and there are many more that could be named,
Or
and
the
it
voluntary
drives
sector.
down.
There's some very good
Yes,
voluntary sector
there are some very good voluntary
organisations
sectors,
in
and I don't wish
Grimsby
to
that
suggest
deliver
that they're
very well.
not. But what does happen is that it drives down wages because the amount that councils can actually deliver in terms of a contract, the budget is so restricted. So that means that it is, cut price services effectively that affects people's wages, which I think in turn affects the revenues to government. And the other point around is specifically around adult social care. The additional 2%. So councils at the moment can increase their council tax up to 2%. Previously, the government has been bribing local authorities and saying, well, we'll give you the difference if you don't charge that 2%. But of course, that means that council revenues are down if they don't do that, because they actually need to keep that money rolling in to provide our essential services. And now the Chancellor has said that they won't, with the reductions, they still want the councils to provide adult social care to a certain standard, and to enable them to do that, they can charge an additional 2% on top of that 2%. So actually there's a potential for a 4% increase in your council tax. Now you tell me which council is going to go out there and ask for 4%, because if they can't ask for that, then it's going to mean that the services suffer. Because the other way that you can raise money is through the business rates, which are going to stay in councils. But in areas where there are fewer of those, or there are fewer high-priced properties, you're just not going to bring the money in to be able to provide those services.
A couple of things to unpack from that. First of all, you did say that you can only expect cut-rate services if you're cutting back that income to the council. As a council taxpayer, I don't want the council paying for anything other than absolutely cut-rate services.
Really? When you're elderly, what you want is a cut-rate service in terms of your personal care? Because I don't believe that's the case, and I don't believe that's the case for you. You wouldn't want that for any of your family. I know that people who are accessing disabled services, they don't want cut-price services. They want services that meet their requirements, and that is the sort of services that we should be aiming for people who have contributed to the system all of their lives.
And secondly, you say that the councils find themselves taking on that responsibility, those responsibilities that come with this the possibility of raising tax, of their own council tax. Is that not government? It's not central government money then. So it's effectively Osborne is shifting the responsibility and the blame for raising those household bills and council taxes.
Devolution.
Well, exactly. Yeah. In many different areas. I mean, yes, I think specifically this in terms of the local government funding, but similar to the proposals in devolution, that there is opponents of devolution, and I think there does need to be more funding and concentration of real power at a local level. But that doesn't mean give them less money, tell them they've got to have a mayor, dictate how they do it, and then don't give them enough money to run the services that you're expecting them to.
On the devolution, £400 billion for the Northern Powerhouse. Well, I don't even know what the Northern Powerhouse is, to be honest, Ian. Very, very quickly, what's that for?
I know, you explain it to us, Ian, because there's lots of MPs in Westminster still scratching their heads.
Less than a minute, Ian. I'm so sorry to leave this to the end, but how is that money, £400 billion, going to be spent?
Well, I've just been put on a committee, number 10 in the Cabinet Office, called a meeting in York a couple of weeks ago, and I attended for the Humber, and I think that it's still a work in progress, because the bright young things in number 10 were showing us some slides. Us locals we're adding a bit to that, and I think it's fair to say the Northern Powerhouse is still a work in progress. But at the moment, it's primarily about transport, what we talked about, electrification over from Liverpool to Hull and Cleethorpes, and making sure that transport works, a bit like the Oyster card
What
does.
what about a direct train Grimsby to London?
Well, yes, we support that
We
too.
can talk about transport policy another time, but for now, Ian Kelly, Melanie Long, thank you both very much for coming on, proving that we can have fun with fiscal policy. Please come and join me again next week for another hot topic. Until then, goodbye.
Cheers.